The summer air was warm, and the streets of New Haven hummed with life. It had been years since Earth established peaceful contact with alien species, and now, humans and extraterrestrials walked side by side as if it had always been this way. The city had adapted, blending cultures in ways no one could have imagined a century ago. Among the bustling streets, Ren weaved through the crowd, adjusting the strap of his messenger bag. He had just finished work at the Cultural Exchange Center, a place designed to help humans and aliens understand each other's ways. Some came to learn languages, others to adjust to Earth's customs, and a few simply to make friends. That's how he met Silari. She was Valari, a race known for their shimmering, almost iridescent skin and elegant features. Their deep violet eyes and silver-blue hair made them look ethereal, like walking constellations. Though they appeared delicate, they were far from fragile. Their species was known for intelligence, resilience, and strict adherence to tradition. But Silari, she was different. She had been on Earth for only a few months, but unlike other Valari, she didn't keep to her own kind. She was fascinated by humans, the way they laughed loudly, their odd customs, the way they spoke with their hands. She spent hours at the center, asking Ren 1,000 questions, from how coffee worked to why humans insisted on making puns. She was frustratingly curious, and yet, Ren found himself enjoying her company more than he wanted to admit. As he turned the corner toward his apartment, a familiar voice called out behind him. "Ren, wait." He stopped and turned to see Silari hurrying toward him. Her silver-blue hair shimmered in the evening light, and her violet eyes were focused on him with an intensity that made his chest tighten. "Hey, Silari. You're out late." She stopped in front of him, catching her breath. I wanted to give you something." Ren raised an eyebrow as she pulled a small, ornate box from the folds of her tunic. "This is for you," she said, holding it out with both hands. He hesitated before taking it. "A gift? What's the occasion?" She tilted her head. "It's a Valari custom. A token of appreciation." Curious, Ren opened the box. Inside was a bracelet, intricately woven from silver threads, with tiny blue gemstones embedded within the strands. It was delicate but sturdy, the kind of craftsmanship that spoke of tradition and meaning. He let out a low whistle. "This is beautiful." "You didn't have to." "I wanted to," she interrupted, her voice softer now. Ren smiled, touched by the gesture. Without thinking, he slid the bracelet onto his wrist, adjusting it until it fit snugly. And then everything changed. Silari gasped. Her already pale skin turned a shade lighter, her eyes going wide in absolute horror. You wore it?" she whispered, stepping back as if he had just committed a terrible crime. Ren blinked, confused. Yeah." She took another step away, looking around frantically as if the sky was about to fall. "Ren, do you know what that means?" His stomach twisted. "That we're good friends?" Silari made a strangled noise, covering her face with both hands. No. Ren, that's not just any bracelet. It's a bonding token." He frowned. What now?" She let out a shaky breath, her voice almost pleading. "In Valari culture, when someone wears that bracelet, it means they've accepted a lifelong bond." The world seemed to tilt slightly. "Lifelong bond? Like friendship?" She groaned. "No. Like a partnership. Like. She swallowed hard. "Like a marriage." Ren felt the blood drain from his face. He looked down at the bracelet, then back at her. "Wait. What?" Silari looked like she was about to faint. Her silver-blue hair shimmered under the streetlights as she paced in front of Ren, her hands clenched into fists. "This can't be happening," she muttered. "This isn't how it was supposed to go." Ren, still staring at the bracelet on his wrist, felt his stomach churn. "Okay, hold on. Let's take a deep breath and start over." Silari stopped pacing and shot him a desperate look. "Ren, you don't understand. That bracelet is sacred in Valari culture. It's not just jewelry. It's a bonding token, Once worn, it signifies an unbreakable connection between two people. He swallowed. Unbreakable? Like forever? She hesitated before nodding slowly. Yes. Valari don't take bonds lightly. That bracelet is a promise, Ren. It means we are committed. The word sent a strange shiver down his spine. Committed like marriage? He asked, his voice quieter now. Silari's expression twisted between frustration and panic. Not exactly. It's deeper than that. Valari bonds are emotional, spiritual. Once formed, they grow over time. We begin to attune to each other, sensing emotions, understanding thoughts without words. It's permanent. Ren let out a nervous laugh. You're kidding, right? She shook her head. His pulse pounded. So, you're telling me that because I put on this bracelet, without knowing what it meant, I just agreed to spend my entire life bonded to you? Silari sighed, rubbing her temples. Yes. And Valari society won't see it as a mistake. They'll expect us to honor it. Ren ran a hand through his hair. And if we don't? She hesitated, her voice dropping to a whisper. Breaking a bond isn't simple. It's painful. And it's dishonorable in my culture. That word, dishonorable, hung between them like a storm cloud. Ren exhaled sharply. Well, this is a mess. Silari gave him an incredulous look. A mess? Ren, this is a catastrophe. Despite the situation, he couldn't help but chuckle. I mean, it's not that bad, right? Her eyes flashed. Not that bad? Do you know what Valari expect from bonded pairs? We live together, we care for each other, we protect one another. It's not just some casual agreement. The words sent a strange warmth through Ren's chest. It wasn't fear, more like shock mixed with something he couldn't name. He looked at her, really looked at her. Silari was unlike anyone he had ever met. She was sharp, inquisitive, stubborn, but also kind in a way that felt rare. She was beautiful too, not just in the way Valari naturally were, but in the way she carried herself. Would it really be so terrible to be bonded to her? The thought made his heartbeat quicken, and he pushed it away. Okay, he said, taking a steadying breath. Let's think logically. Is there a way to undo this? A way to break the bond without ruining your reputation or causing whatever pain you're talking about? Silari's shoulders slumped. It's possible, but it's difficult. There's a ritual, one that severs the connection before it fully forms. But... She hesitated. But what? She chewed her lip. The longer we stay bonded, the harder it becomes to break. If we don't do it soon, it'll be irreversible. Ren's stomach flipped. How long do we have? Silari looked up at the sky, her expression troubled. Days. Maybe a week. The weight of her words settled between them. A choice had to be made, and soon. Ren crossed his arms. All right. Let's say we don't break it right away. What happens to us in the meantime? Silari looked away, her voice quieter now. We start to feel each other's emotions. Our connection grows stronger. We'll begin to change. He frowned. Change how? She let out a shaky breath. We become attuned to each other. If I'm happy, you'll feel it. If I'm in pain, you'll feel it too. And eventually... She trailed off, her fingers brushing the bracelet on his wrist. Eventually what? He pressed. Her violet eyes locked onto his, and for the first time since this conversation started, she looked truly vulnerable. Eventually, it won't feel like an accident anymore. Ren felt his throat tighten. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The city lights flickered around them, cars hummed in the distance, but all Ren could focus on was the weight of the bracelet on his wrist and the way Silari's gaze held something unspoken. He cleared his throat. All right. We'll figure this out together. Silari blinked. Together? He nodded. Yeah. I mean, I got myself into this, so I'm not going to leave you to deal with it alone. We'll learn what we need to, and if we decide to break the bond, we'll do it the right way. She stared at him for a long moment before letting out a soft, almost relieved sigh. Thank you, Ren. He gave her a lopsided grin. Just promise me one thing. What? No more surprise gifts? Despite everything, she laughed, and for the first time that night, the tension between them lessened, if only a little. The next morning, Ren woke up feeling strange. At first, he thought it was just the lingering stress from last night's revelation. But as he sat up, rubbing his face, a wave of something unfamiliar washed over him, an emotion that wasn't his own. Anxiety. Uncertainty. He blinked, frowning. It wasn't his anxiety. It was coming from somewhere else. His eyes drifted to the silver-threaded bracelet on his wrist. Oh no. A knock at his apartment door made him jolt. He already knew who it was before he even opened it. Silari stood in the hallway, shifting awkwardly. Her silver-blue hair was slightly tousled, and her deep violet eyes held a nervousness that made Ren's own stomach twist, except he was beginning to realize that wasn't his nervousness. You feel it, don't you? She asked quietly. Ren exhaled, leaning against the doorway. Yeah. That's new. She gave a small nod. The bond is forming. He let out a dry laugh. Great. So now we're connected and I get to experience twice the emotional chaos. Silari narrowed her eyes. You think I want you feeling my emotions? It's just as unsettling for me, you know. Ren smirked. So you were stressing out all morning? She crossed her arms. I was concerned. He chuckled, stepping aside to let her in. She hesitated before walking inside, glancing around his apartment. It was small, cluttered in a way that felt lived in, a stark contrast to the neat, minimalist style Valari preferred. She poked at a stack of books on the coffee table. Do humans always leave their living spaces like this? It's called organized chaos, Ren said. I know where everything is. Silari arched an eyebrow. Where's your communicator? Ren opened his mouth, then frowned. A good question. He started searching between the couch cushions while Silari shook her head. Unbelievable, she muttered. Despite everything, Ren found himself smiling. It was strange how quickly they had fallen into a rhythm, like this wasn't the most insane situation of his life. But then, Silari's expression turned serious. We need to start learning how to manage this, Ren. He sat on the couch, rubbing his temples. Right. So, where do we start? She sat across from him, folding her hands in her lap. Valari bonds are built on trust and connection. We share responsibilities, we look after each other, and… She hesitated. And? Her violet eyes met his. Over time we sink. Emotionally. Mentally. Physically. Ren coughed. Physically. Her cheeks darkened to a deep violet. Not in that way. She cleared her throat, looking flustered. I meant we start to react to each other's presence. If one of us is exhausted, the other feels it. If one of us is unwell, the other instinctively knows. Ren leaned back. So, we basically turn into an emotional Wi-Fi connection? Silari gave him a flat look. That's not how I would describe it, but sure. He exhaled. Okay. So how do we control it? She thought for a moment. We practice. We learn how to sense the bond without letting it overwhelm us. Ren frowned. And if we don't? Silari's expression darkened. Then the bond controls us. That sent a chill down his spine. He didn't like the sound of that. All right, he said. Let's practice. What do we do? Silari straightened. Close your eyes. Ren gave her a suspicious look. You're not going to hit me, are you? She sighed. Just close your eyes, Ren. Grumbling, he obeyed. Now, she said softly, focus on me. Not with your eyes. With your mind. He furrowed his brows. That's vague? She exhaled. All right, fine. What do you feel? Ren frowned, trying to focus. At first, there was nothing. Just the quiet hum of his apartment, the faint sound of traffic outside. But then something. A pull. A gentle thread of emotion, not his own, but hers. A mix of concentration, curiosity, and something softer, something he couldn't quite name. His eyes snapped open. Whoa. Silari tilted her head. You felt it? He nodded. Yeah. That was weird. A small, satisfied smile played at the corners of her lips. Good. That means the bond is growing. Ren swallowed. Great. So what's next? Do we start finishing each other's sentences or something? Silari chuckled. Not yet. But if the bond strengthens. She trailed off, looking at him carefully. It won't feel strange forever, Ren. In time, it will feel natural. That thought unsettled him more than he wanted to admit. For now, he could still see the lines separating himself from Silari. But what would happen when those lines blurred? Would he still be just Ren? Or would he become something else, something more? He wasn't sure if that thought scared him or excited him. The next few days passed in a strange, unspoken rhythm. Ren found himself adjusting to the bond faster than he expected. At first, it had been overwhelming, feeling Silari's emotions like whispers at the edge of his thoughts, catching flickers of her moods when she wasn't even in the same room. But soon, it became normal. He could tell when she was frustrated, even without looking at her. He knew when she was amused, even if she didn't laugh. And oddly enough, he could sense when she was thinking about him. That part was the most unsettling. It happened at the strangest moments, while he was making coffee, while he was walking home, even when he was half asleep. A sudden warmth, a soft, thoughtful presence that was distinctly Silari. She never said anything about it, and neither did he. Because what was he supposed to say? Hey, I can feel when you're thinking about me, and it makes my stomach do weird things? Yeah, not happening. It was on the 5th night after the bond formed that things changed. Ren was sitting on his couch, flipping through channels, when his doorbell rang. He knew who it was before he even stood up. Silari. She looked tense. Her silver-blue hair was slightly damp, like she had just taken a shower, and she was dressed in a casual Earth-style hoodie and leggings. It was strange seeing her in human clothes. Strange in a way that made Ren's pulse jump. Hey, he said, stepping aside to let her in. She nodded but didn't say much as she walked past him. She hesitated near the couch, then turned to face him. I need your help. That got his attention. With what? She took a deep breath. I need to understand humans better. Your emotions. Your connections. The way you handle things like this. Ren frowned. You mean the bond? She hesitated, then nodded. Yes. I thought I understood it before I came to Earth, but humans, you're different. You don't bond the way Valari do. You fall in love, you break apart, you change. Valari don't do that. Our bonds are for life. We don't get to choose if we love. We just do. Ren swallowed. And you're afraid? Silari looked away. I don't understand what I'm supposed to feel. And if I don't understand, I can't control it. There was something raw in her voice, something uncertain. And Ren realized that for all her knowledge about bonds and traditions, Silari had never actually experienced this before. She was just as lost as he was. Without thinking, he stepped closer. All right, he said. Then let's figure it out together. She looked up at him, violet eyes wide. How? He exhaled. We do things the human way. We spend time together. We talk. We figure out what this means to us, not just what your people say it should mean. Silari studied him for a long moment, then slowly nodded. All right. But if we do this, you have to be honest with me. No avoiding your emotions. Ren smirked. You do realize I'm a human guy, right? Avoiding emotions is basically in the manual. She rolled her eyes. Then consider this part of your education. That night, they stayed up talking for hours. Ren told her about his life, about growing up in a world that had just started accepting alien species, about his job at the Cultural Exchange Center, about the things that made him laugh and the things that made him angry. Silari listened, really listened, and then she spoke. She told him about Valari expectations, how she had been raised knowing she would bond with someone someday, but never expecting it to be like this. How her people valued unity over individuality. How love, as humans understood it, was something foreign to her. You choose love, she murmured. Valari don't. Ren frowned. And you think that's bad? She shook her head. No. I think it's beautiful. But also terrifying. The way she looked at him when she said it made Ren's breath catch. He was starting to realize something. Something dangerous. This bond wasn't just a mistake. It wasn't just a cultural accident. It was real. And it was changing them. The question was, were they ready for that? Over the next few days, the bond grew stronger. It wasn't just the emotions anymore. It was the little things. Ren would reach for something, only to find Silari already handing it to him. She would sigh in frustration before he even said something annoying. When he laughed, he could feel a flicker of warmth from her, even when she wasn't looking at him. It was getting hard to tell where he ended and she began. And it scared him. Because it wasn't just some mystical connection anymore. It felt real. It felt like her. One evening, they sat in his apartment watching a movie. Ren had picked a classic human romance, mostly to mess with Silari, who pretended to find the concept ridiculous. This is impractical, she muttered as the two leads confessed their love in the rain. Ren smirked. You say that, but I can feel you getting emotional over there. Silari stiffened. I am not getting emotional. Ren raised an eyebrow. Silari, I can literally feel it. She huffed, crossing her arms. Fine. Maybe it's interesting. The way humans express love. It's passionate. Intense. Uncontrolled. Ren grinned. And that's a bad thing? Silari hesitated, her fingers brushing the bracelet on his wrist. Not bad. Just dangerous. The way she said it made Ren's stomach twist. He swallowed. Because you're afraid of what happens if we can't control this bond? She turned to him, her violet eyes searching his. Because I'm afraid of what happens if we don't want to. Silence stretched between them. Ren wanted to say something easy, something casual to break the tension. But he couldn't. Because for once, there was no avoiding it. The bond was real. And the truth was, he didn't want to break it. Not anymore. Did she feel the same? Before he could ask, a sharp wave of emotion hit him. A sudden panic. But it wasn't his. Silari's hand clenched into a fist. Someone's here. Ren barely had time to react before a loud knock echoed through his apartment. Silari stood, tense. Valari, she whispered. I can feel them. Ren's pulse pounded. What do they want? She swallowed hard. They know about us. And just like that, everything changed. The knock came again, sharper this time. Ren's heart pounded as he glanced at Silari. She stood frozen, her violet eyes dark with uncertainty. He could feel it, her fear, her hesitation. The weight of everything they had been trying to figure out pressing down on her all at once. He reached for her hand without thinking. We face this together, okay? She jolted at his touch, her gaze snapping to his. Something flickered in her expression, surprise, warmth, relief. Then, she nodded. Ren turned and opened the door. Two Valari stood outside. Their posture was rigid, their expressions unreadable. One was tall, with silver markings running along his temples, a sign of authority among their kind. The other was younger, her piercing gaze flicking between Ren and Silari with quiet intensity. The taller one spoke first. Silari, you are bonded to this human? She lifted her chin. Yes. His silver eyes narrowed. Intentionally? Silari hesitated. Ren felt the spike of conflict within her, loyalty to her people warring with something deeper. Slowly, she exhaled. Yes? Ren's breath caught. She had a choice. She could have denied it, claimed it was an accident, fought for a way out. But she didn't. The Valari man studied her carefully. You understand what this means, then. A human bond is fragile. Incomplete. It cannot provide what our kind requires. Silari's grip on Ren's hand tightened. You're wrong. The younger Valari frowned. You would abandon our traditions? Risk dishonor? Silari took a step forward, her voice steady. Our traditions are meant to guide us, not control us. We speak of unity, of understanding, but we refuse to see the depth of human connection. Their love isn't weaker than ours. It's stronger, because they choose it. Ren stared at her, something inside him unraveling. She wasn't just defending him. She was defending them. The older Valari sighed. And you, human? His gaze locked onto Ren. Do you truly understand what you are taking on? The bond will change you. It already has? Ren swallowed, glancing at Silari. The past week had been confusing, overwhelming, terrifying, even. But it had also been something else. It had been right. He turned back to the Valari. I know exactly what I'm choosing. Silari's breath hitched beside him. For a long moment, the Valari delegation was silent. Then, at last, the elder inclined his head. Very well. If this is your path, we will not interfere. But know this, there is no undoing it now. The bond is permanent. Silari smiled softly. I know. With one last glance, the Valari turned and left. Ren barely had time to process what had just happened before Silari exhaled, her shoulders trembling. He turned to her. You really meant that? She met his gaze, something raw and unguarded in her eyes. Yes. His chest tightened. He hadn't realized how much he had wanted to hear that until now. Silari hesitated, then reached for his wrist, her fingers brushing over the silver-threaded bracelet. I don't know what love means to humans, she admitted. But I want to learn. With you? Ren smiled, his fingers curling over hers. Then we figure it out. Together. Silari's lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something more. But she didn't need to. Because for the first time since this all began, Ren didn't need words to understand her. And neither did she. The bond had already made its choice.